the Royal Blue podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
Hello everybody, welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue podcast. My name is Joe Thomas. I am the Echo's Everton correspondent. Alongside me is my colleague Christopher Beesley. Doing it remotely again today. Ian Kroll is having a quiet one. I think if you've been following him on Twitter over the past weeks, few weeks, he's getting his head involved in the game a lot with Everton at the minute, and I think he's having a deep breath before what could be a difficult afternoon at West Ham. We'll have to wait and see what Chris thinks about that coming up. But first, Chris, obviously, hello. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of the fallout from Southampton and build up towards West Ham, you've got a bit of an announcement, haven't you?
Yeah, as Ian has already teased online regarding Goodison Park, my home. It's quite apt, actually, for number 11. We had Michael Ball for number 3, which was apt. And for number 11, we've got the greatest 11 in Everton's history, the greatest left foot in Everton's history, the one and only Kevin Sheedy. We've got that one in the bag. Kevin was on top form yesterday when I spoke to him. So we're hoping to get that one out during the international break. So that should be a treat for Blues there. Another huge dob of nostalgia from the most educated left peg in Goodison Park history. Yeah, it really will hopefully be a treat for all our listeners and viewers.
Wouldn't mind having him available to call upon this weekend, would you?
Yeah. Well, obviously there's plenty of competition there. James Rodriguez, even Dwight McNeil in the latter years in terms of the left foots. But yeah, what a special player. I think I didn't let Kevin know yesterday. I just wanted to keep professional, but he was actually he was my boyhood hero. He really was. He was my own Goodison idol growing up. Him and Neville Southall. But yeah, some real great tales from Kevin. What a special player. And of course, obviously started at Liverpool. Well, not just started at Hereford, but obviously moved from Liverpool to Everton. So some interesting tales regarding that one as well. But a real immense stellar talent, and delighted to have him on board.
Sounds like it'd be well worth a listen, Chris, and hopefully as many of you as possible get that listen and also follow the rest of that series. We've had some brilliant guests on it already, and there'll be more to come over the coming months as we bid our farewell to Goodison with doing everything we can off the pitch to try and make it as fun the final season as possible, aren't we, Chris? Despite what's going on the pitch, hasn't been the best so far, has it? Which obviously brings us to Southampton last week and obviously West Ham this one. Chris, we'll go into what you're thinking about West Ham first, because that probably sets the context for the chat about Southampton. I mean, just in terms of how you're feeling right now, West Ham obviously a bit of an interesting one, aren't they? 2 years ago, this was Frank Lampard's last game for Everton. If you remember at the time, it was dubbed El Sacchio because you had David Moyes and Frank Lampard both under huge pressure. Everton lost 2-0 down there, and it was ultimately Frank Lampard who paid the price for that a couple of days later. Then last season, Sean Dyche took Everton down there, and they got a good win for Dominic Calvert-Lewin. This season, I think it's fair to say Julen Lopetegui is under a lot of pressure, just like probably Sean Dyche is, although I don't think that Dyche is under as much internal pressure from the club going into this game. But a bad result could make things harder going into what is going to be a very tricky looking December, and the build up to it certainly would heap the pressure onto Brentford. But where are your thoughts, Chris? You optimistic? You hopeful? You worried? Where are you?
I certainly expecting a bit more than what we saw down at Southampton. I mean, it's obviously it is a very tricky fixture in terms of West Ham United. I was going to say a decent outfit. I'd be like you and start to quote Sean Dyche, but no, we're an expensively assembled team of considerable talent and great expectations there in recent seasons. I mean, we saw that even with David Moyes. I thought it was very unfair, really. I mean, he delivers their first trophy in over 40 years, took them to 6th and 7th place finishes, which, considering West Ham United had never even won the league, that was their most consistent spell in the club's entire history. But I know, I guess, was sort of echoes with Dyche with the current situation with Dyche. Some elements of the fan base not entirely satisfied with the style of football, not deemed to be in keeping with the self-proclaimed Academy of Football who won the World Cup, and David Moyes ended up being taken out the picture when his contract ended, and obviously Lopetegui's come in with the brief to sort of bring that more expansive approach. And so far, results been up and down, and it's not necessarily been the start that West Ham United would have expected or wanted from Lopetegui. So, as you say, he's probably under more pressure internally than Sean Dyche is. Of course, the Blues boss has certainly been feeling the heat this week after that defeat at bottom club Southampton, and I think we all have, really, in terms of the response to that from certain elements of the fan base. So in terms of being the international break after this fixture, and as you say, on the horizon, a more difficult looking block of fixtures, it's certainly a big game for both clubs, for both managers. And all I would say is that at least Everton have a decent overall record in the Premier League era against West Ham United, and a decent record there as well. So that's something to cling to. But there have been, before that 1-0 win last season, as you mentioned, there's been a few reversals there as well, as Frank Lampard knows more than anyone.
Yeah, I mean, that prior form might be something that you cling on to, but not Sean Dyche, because Sean Dyche says the past doesn't dictate the future. So that's one that he said quite a lot recently. I'm a little bit nervous about this, I've got to be honest. I was very optimistic for Southampton. I still don't think that was misplaced optimism. We'll come on to the fallout from Southampton a little bit, but I think that game played out largely from a Southampton perspective how Everton would have expected it to, and probably how Everton would have wanted it to. And therefore, I think that it's particularly galling that they weren't able to take advantage of what I think was a very big opportunity. But I mean, we'll go into a bit of team news. West Ham have their own issues on this front. Mohamed Kudus, a player who so nearly joined Everton 2 years ago, well, he's out serving the final game of his 3-match ban for his suspension for his altercation with Mickey van der Ven at Spurs. Edson Alvarez picked up 2 yellow cards against Forest in that defeat for West Ham last week, so he's also suspended, and their big money summer signing Nicholas Fulkrug is also out. We're assuming that he's out. It's been, looking into this week, it's been very difficult to try and make any headway on what his problem is and how long he's going to be out for. But I think the consensus seems to be that it's going to rule him out of this game. Best I could find is a description on the West Ham website where they say it's between the calf and the Achilles area.
Okay.
Not too specific there. From an Everton perspective, interesting one, really. Obviously, we know the longer-term injuries. Timur Obenham, Youssef Chimiti, both foot injuries. James Garner with his back. Armando Broja is making progress. Obviously, people have seen the training photos of him this week. Mm-hmm. I think the international break comes at a good and a bad time for him, because I think right now he probably needs games, and a couple of under-21s games over the coming weeks might be useful to start easing him in a bit more gently. But the break, because the international games, prevents that. But what that does do is it just means it's an extra fortnight for him to be patient, to carry building up. So that's good. The 3 question marks. Sorry, there's one more doubt as well. That's not even a doubt. Sorry, Seamus Coleman's definitely out. He's got a minor what they hope is a minor hamstring injury. They were waiting on a scan last night. I haven't heard any update on that, but he's definitely out of this game. Had been called up to the Republic of Ireland squad. And the scan will dictate whether or not he joins up with them. But I mean, from an Everton perspective, you'd probably hope that they'd wrap him in cotton wool if he's got an issue and he doesn't go out there. But I have to wait and see on that. 3 touch and goes. First one, Iliman Ndiaye. He was back training yesterday. He came off against Southampton with a dead leg. Dyche thinks it's looking favourable on that front. Abdoulaye Doucouré missed last week altogether with a bit of it's an issue in the groin area. Again, Dyche thinks it's favourable that he might return. Probably the biggest question mark for us is the biggest question mark from a fitness perspective of last week as well. That's Dwight McNeil. So, I broke the story yesterday that Dwight McNeil's a doubt for this game. Essentially, and this is something else that we might come on to when we talk about the context in which Jarrad Branthwaite has been handled. He hobbled off against a Fulham game a fortnight ago, as I'm sure we all remember. That was with a knock to the outside of his knee. Last week, he barely trained, and it looked like he probably wasn't going to play. He ended up at Southampton and playing 90 minutes. Wasn't his best display. think we probably all, I think most of us were looking at it. I think he didn't look 100%. Well, essentially what Everton are saying is he had a knee issue from Fulham. It settled down. They thought he could play. He did play, and it's flared up since. And now they're waiting to see whether or not it settles down again for this one. But I think Dwight McNeil, a player who, I think we can debate long and hard about where he should be playing. And, we have done on this podcast, and I'm very, very much an advocate of him on the left. And I think that the chances that Everton created after he moved on to the left last week probably were further evidence for my point. And I just keep thinking back to that Jack Harrison missed opportunity from the Dwight McNeil Dwight McNeil cross, and just keep thinking, I know Dominic Calvert has missed some chances, but he's also been very isolated this season. What must he have been thinking on the sidelines there as all of a sudden they start whipping balls in from the deep and he's on the bench? Maybe another issue to come in for. But regardless as to where he should be playing, I think it's fair to say that Dwight McNeil is an important part of Sean Dyche's Everton. So that's going to be an interesting call for them to make. You'd think with him having hobbled off a fortnight ago, the issue flared up last week and flaring and causing problems for this week with a fortnight break, Chris. I think surely you give him a break if there's any doubt there. What would you? I mean, I know he's important, and Everton needs to see this as an opportunity down at West Ham, and those suspensions and injuries obviously add to the fragility of West Ham, where obviously there's a lot of pressure under Lopetegui and they're really struggling for their home form. But I mean, it's an interesting one with McNeil, isn't it? Because again, there's this mantra of Dyche wanting his players to get fit, and then there's McNeil coming in at the last minute with no training.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it actually at the start of last season, didn't we? He got that unfortunate injury. He was at Stoke City in pre-season, and that sort of put him on the back foot, and then took him a while to get going again until we finally saw the paintbrush, as it were. We've already seen the paintbrush a few times this season, but I think, like you, I'm not too sure about this in terms of his role, and that, yes, we have had those magic moments from Dwight McNeil. But something not right still with the balance and the overall look of the team. And like you, I'm not necessarily going to come down 100% on one side or the other of that. That great football debate that you and Ian have been having for a few weeks. I'm a bit more open-minded, but I will concede for all those sort of highlight reel moments that we've seen from Dwight McNeil. I do concede in terms of your point in the overall balance of the side, and as you say, the supply line that he can bring when he's back on that left wing position, as you say, as we saw with that big chance for Jack Harrison, and it was a big chance. I'd like to have seen him do better with that one. In terms of his fitness for tomorrow, it's just a strange dynamic how we've had all this fury over Jarrad Branthwaite and the manager not seeming to help himself, and that maybe what was seen as an overcautious approach for Branthwaite, yet McNeil's had periods where he's not been training properly and he's looked leggy, he's not looked himself, and yet he's been still thrown in there and playing 90 minutes at times. So there does seem to be a discrepancy in terms of how one player is being. I know all injuries are different and all players are different, but how one player is being treated and another one, because I mean, let's be honest here, let's have it right. Jarrad Branthwaite, is Everton's most valuable player, arguably Everton's most talented player. So to treat him one way and then McNeil another way does seem strange. But if we're looking ahead at these big block of games, big tough games, and there's a lot of them obviously over the festive period in December, might be best to sort of exercise a caution if he's not quite right, especially if you've got someone like Gilliman and Dyer who's recovering, like you say, from the dead leg as well, and Decore, who can also play in that role. He's just coming back from his absence as well. It might be one if McNeil isn't right, just perhaps have him sit out this one, hope that he's available for that big block of games on the horizon.
The Royal Blue Podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
There's a little part of me that wonders whether McNeil, because I thought this last week going to Southampton, I thought Southampton would have been a good opportunity to rest McNeil and try something different because of the fragility of the opposition there. And that's why I also thought it'd be a very good game for Branthwaite to come back into as well, because I still do think Everton have enough in that squad to be going down there and certainly playing with more authority than they did. But there's a little part of me that wonders if McNeil was to be unavailable, whether that could potentially not necessarily be a good thing, but it would make Dyche look at something different. And if that different thing was Iliman and Dye in the number 10 role, then hopefully Iliman and Dye would take advantage of that and put in a performance which hammers home that my belief and the belief of some others, he should be in the middle. I've got to be perfectly honest, so I think that if Dwight McNeil isn't available, I think Iliman and Dye probably stays on the left, and either Jack Harrison goes in the number 10 role and Lindstrom stays outright, or if Decore is back fit, I wonder if, especially if being away from home against a side in Southampton in West Ham that are talented, they're struggling this season. But my fear about this game is just that they have a big squad, with some good players in it, don't they? And you just fear that this might be the one in game in 4 that they just click, that just keeps Lopetegui going for a bit longer. That's my little bit of a concern, but we'll have to see on McNeil. On Branthwaite, another interesting one, obviously big topic of debate. I must admit on this, I think this week we start to see Dyche talking about being careful around them from a fitness perspective, and I think I have to be pretty clear that that's something that hasn't really come into the explanations over the past 2 or 3 weeks. It's only now that that's creeping into the discussion. For anybody that was following the press conference, our coverage of it yesterday, Dyche was making a little bit of a play of the fact that he thought Crystal Palace. He apparently thought that Crystal Palace was too soon for Branthwaite to come back in, and it seems he feels vindicated by the fact that he picked up an injury afterwards. Although previously he said that injury was unconnected to the one that kept him out all summer. And also, I'd be interested to see who overruled him in that respect. If he didn't think who it was that he was deciding had a better view of this than him. Because I always would look at that and think that he probably has the biggest amount of influence there. But, I asked him about Branthwaite's absence after Ipswich when he wasn't in the squad, and Dyche was saying essentially he thought he could have been involved that day, but he wanted to give him an extra week. Fulham obviously came on the final minutes, and then Southampton came on the final minutes. And after Southampton last week, I asked him what was it that was keeping Branthwaite out, and he said it was the form of Tarkowski and Keane. And then look, there have been some good moments from both of them over the course of this season, and big moments from both of them during the 5 unbeaten that took Everton into Southampton. But I think my thought process is, one, that Branthwaite is Everton's best player, he's their best centre back, and 2, for all the positives of a 5-match unbeaten run, I thought there's some pretty big warning signs as well that weren't heeded and probably cost Everton at Southampton, and one of them was issues at the back. So it is an interesting one with Jarrad Branthwaite. Like I said, when I asked him last week why he didn't play at Southampton, he said it was a form of Keane and Tarkowski, and then stressed that he thought both of them played well in that game. So if he's been consistent with that answer, then you would suspect that Keane and Tarkowski start again tomorrow, which will be an interesting dynamic going into the game. And we probably will see some of Jarrad Branthwaite over the coming fortnights, because he's just been picked for the England under 21s, and I wonder what that will do for him, because obviously minutes on the pitch would be very useful for him. But aside from everything else in this debate about tactics and things like that, and whether Everton can afford to not have him on the pitch from a personal perspective, obviously, one, you would think he'd want to be on that pitch, and 2, you'd think he'd be wanting to do everything he can do to get himself back into the England senior squad that he was at the cusp of at the end of last season. I just wonder whether he'll see the under 21s as a good opportunity to get minutes, or a frustrating sign of the fact that he's trod water for 6 months now because of his, maybe not quite 6 months, but since the beginning of the summer, because of his injuries and his lack of game time. Could be an interesting one. Nathan Patterson, obviously being fit for a while, didn't get picked for the Scotland side. Might be an interesting dynamic behind the scenes. Players start to see the implications. We saw Jake O'Brien not get selected for Republic of Ireland the last time round as well. Not getting on the pitch will lead to frustrations well beyond Everton, won't it, Chris? And it's probably something else you got to keep an eye on.
Yeah, like you say, and with O'Brien hasn't started a Premier League game. Patterson, despite all those right backs that Everton have used, 4 different. I mean, Ashley Young, Roman Dixon, Seamus Coleman, even midfielder James Garner. They've all started in that role this season. Yet the man who they spent £11 million on to become Seamus Coleman's long-term successor, Nathan Patterson, hasn't had a sniff. So they even got linked. With another right back this week, Lamptey from Brighton and Hove Albion, who's due to be out of contract in the summer. So, yeah, frustrating times for them in terms of Branthwaite. Yeah, it's odd, like you say, in terms of getting consistency over this, because the narrative does seem to be changing. Dyche retrospectively said how, as you mentioned, he personally made the call to keep him out at Portman Road. But then retrospectively again, he's saying that talked about general consensus for Crystal Palace, like you say, has it been overruled? And he also obviously mentioned the fact that there was the operation this summer. And I know that's something you've been asking him and trying to get clarity over during pre-season itself. And again, it wasn't always entirely clear from the manager's answers just what had gone on there. So I do wonder, is there something more playing behind the scenes? And hopefully it's not anything more sinister in terms of Jarrad's long-term fitness and getting him right. I think he just wants to be playing right now, doesn't he? He feels he's okay now, and the Branthwaite camp believe that it's time to get Jarrad back on the pitch, and I think many Everton supporters do, of course. We've got to trust Sean Dyche's judgment on these matters. Ultimately, look at the way he fixed Dominic Calvert-Lewin in terms of the factory reset, as Dom called it, summer before last, and went on to play 39 games in all comps. But given that Jarrad, I think, played 35 Premier League games last season, Everton have really missed him this season. I know, as you say, Michael Keane's been outstanding at times, particularly that game at Portman Road when he was a colossus at both ends of the pitch. James Tarkowski hasn't missed a Premier League game since coming to the club, but I feel that he's been struggling without Jarrad at times. And I think Gavin Buckland's made quite a sort of justified point that we keep getting at least one moment in every game that James Tarkowski does his big hard man act and go through the back of somebody or does something. I'd like personally, I can understand why the manager didn't pick Jarrad straight away and gave Keane another game against Fulham after the Ipswich performance. But we all expected him to start at Southampton, and we'd hope that he starts at the London Stadium. But like you say, it might not be the case. If thinking, I'll give him another couple of weeks after this international break. But like you say, if he's playing for England under 21s, well, if he's fit enough to start for them, well, he's fit enough to start for Everton.
The Royal Blue Podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
There might be an interesting one where it might just be easier for everybody if he doesn't. I say easier for everyone. I mean, everybody that's got a stake in the decision making if he doesn't start tomorrow, because it might be a difficult game for him to make his first game back. And again, this is why Southampton felt like a really good opportunity to ease him back into it. But, that could be a tough game. Maybe he could have the under-21s to get some match fitness on a less high-profile stage and come in for Brentford, which would be, those first 3 games would be Brentford, Man United, Wolves, and obviously whilst there'd be challenges amongst those games, Brentford and Wolves as the first 2 of your first 3 coming back might be quite handy. I think one thing to probably watch out for this weekend if Branthwaite doesn't start is that Michael Keane's on 4 yellow cards. So there's a chance that the decision gets taken out of Sean Dyche's hands. If Keane was to pick up a 5th booking and Tarkowski's got 3, so he's only 2 away, then a gap might naturally open up in the centre back, and maybe that's what Dyche is waiting for maybe he's full on in his belief that Keane and Tarkowski have played really well for a sustained period of time, genuinely deserve to keep Jarrad Branthwaite out. And he's waiting for the excuse to not play them because he can't, because someone's got 5 yellows. So I'll have to keep an eye on that one. I think colouring every conversation about West Ham is probably still the shadow cast over everyone by Southampton. Chris, it's nearly a week since we were at St Mary's, and nearly a week since we made that what felt like a very long drive back. Certainly in comparison to Ipswich a fortnight earlier, which was as long but didn't feel anywhere near as much of a chore given what we'd witnessed at Portman Road. Just where are you now in your verdict on Southampton? Because it's clear, I think, that it's a result and a performance that resonated amongst certainly big elements of the fan base, hasn't it?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I was a bit taken aback by the clamour after that particular game. I was as frustrated as anyone and as disappointed as anyone. But I understood that during the 5-match unbeaten run, things had not been all hunky-dory, far from it. Very poor performance. Would have been highs and lows in that, although they managed to move on from the wretched start with 4 straight defeats, and things were looking a lot more solid. The performances hadn't necessarily been of the highest class, but it was one of those games that I thought Everton had more than enough chances to win it, but there's always that nagging feeling when you miss all those chances like they did do, that Southampton could nick it on the break 1-0, which is exactly what happened. We saw what a huge result it was for them. We just got to hope it's not like one of those Everton Leicester moments that we saw, because remember Pat Nevin was saying to me earlier in this week, if Everton had gone and won at St Mary's, they'd have been level on points at the time with Manchester United and Fulham. Everything would be looking sweet. You'd be moving towards mid-table, whereas I see the other way round at Constantina's in the other direction. Southampton closed the gap, and obviously you don't get the points. So it's a very different sort of look to the table. And there was that sort of dynamic. If I can't remember now, could Everton have moved up to 8th when they'd beaten Leicester a couple of years ago under Lampard? Yes. Obviously, it all fell apart very quickly for Frank Lampard after that. Albeit, obviously, there was the World Cup break, but he was never able to sort of recover from that. So I just hope it's not one of those moments, and hopefully you can just say bad day at the office. And it's unfortunate because I think Evertonians, quite rightly so, have this feeling, and Michael Ball's talked about it in his column, the soft touch, if anyone needs a timely pick-me-up in terms of a victory or a goal or something like that, Everton are fall guys, and again, that's how it proved with, Southampton, and what was a huge result for them.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for me, I was quite frustrated watching the game. I think Everton created enough chances and enough good chances for Sean Dyche to feel a degree of justification in terms of how he approached the game, and his belief that Everton could very easily have won it. They very easily could have won that game. You obviously hit the woodwork several times. Beto's goal was only just offside. A couple of brilliant saves from a Lindstrom free kick and Keane's header. So look, there were opportunities there. But I think the big frustration for me, I think, really was just, I've written this a lot in over the past week. It's just how, most of those chances came in the last 10, 15 minutes, and it felt like it was a game that was almost approached as it, like Dyche, I think, approaches a lot of games where it's keep it tight for the first hour and then see where you're at after it. And I just think that was one of the few games in a season where Everton can target, or this version of Everton can target and go, this is somewhere where we can lay stamp a bit of authority down here, get a win here. This is a poor side playing in front of an anxious fan base, fragile on confidence, a promoted side with a squad that's doesn't have perhaps the knowledge and experience of Everton's at this standard. It just felt like a real opportunity to go down and assert yourself on them. And try and get that early goal, and then once you get the early goal, everything flows. Should hopefully flow from there. And I think written about McNeil not being out wide and Branthwaite not being at the back, and what that did to Everton from a tactical setup. Just really did like that. That Southampton side feels like the perfect opposition for Dyche. The way they play out from the back, and we saw that most of Everton's best moments in the first 75 minutes came from when they were when they're putting pressure on the players, the defenders playing out from the back and forcing them into mistakes. And if they could have maintained that intensity, if they could have had more of a coherent and consistent approach to putting that pressure on, where the back four pushed up a lot higher up the pitch to get closer to the midfield, you can then get closer to the attacks. You haven't got the space that opened up for Southampton when they played through Everton's press. Then I just think Everton probably would have come away from there with 3 points. And I think having Branthwaite at the back would allow Everton to have pushed up another 10 yards and do that because of his pace and athleticism. Means that you can recover if he goes out and he misses that first tackle. I'm still really frustrated about it. And I think that my big takeaway from yesterday, this forms some of my coverage from the press conference at Finch Farm, is having spoke to Dyche about it again and seen his responses to other reporters. It's very much seems to be the belief that this week's work has been founded upon was that that Southampton performance was actually pretty much what Dyche wanted, and that they were unlucky to not come away with more. And that's a bit of a concern for me, because I think that one of my fears about Southampton was that Beto's last-minute goal against Fulham might have allowed people to come away from that game thinking, oh, actually, Everton hadn't done that bad. And the focus on brilliant moment for Beto and the resilience of the side to keep going, when really the focus should have been the fact that Everton were woeful for 94 minutes in that game. I think lessons weren't learned against Fulham. That in fact that kind of had an influence on the Southampton defeat. And I think the big question for me is whether or not then that will continue into this game, which is a big game for a number of reasons. Obviously, look, Everton, Dyche will say Everton have lost 1 in 6, and that's fair. That's true, and he'll say it could very easily have been 6 unbeaten going into this game, and he has had injuries to deal with. But octopus out the table. First Everton had the easiest first 10 games of this season so far, and it's hard to disagree with that. And you're just looking at 9 points. Okay, there's a 4-point gap to Ipswich in the relegation zone. I think Everton, from what I've seen, Everton are better than Leicester, Ipswich and Southampton this season. But it's just kind of what's going to come next, I think, is the problem, because West Ham is going to be tough. Now, you got, I think, Southampton and Wolves, the bottom two in the league, play each other this weekend. So if Everton were to lose and one of those sides were to win, then whichever of those sides was to win would come within 3 points of Everton. If it was Southampton's win, they come within 2 points of Everton. And look, I know they've still got a lot of these to do to keep that up, and Everton have got Wolves at home and Brentford at home either side of Man United at the end of international break. But it just puts so much pressure on those games. And again, this West Ham game is the type of game you want to be going down there thinking that there's not a lot of pressure on. And you think if there's not much pressure on, you can go down there and maybe take it to them and try and exploit some of their vulnerabilities and their fragile mindset at the moment. But unfortunately, it feels like Everton are going down there with a fragile mindset as well, and as a result, the stakes are higher. And then if they don't get a result, then the stakes are higher for Brentford and for Wolves, and that's where the problem comes for me. Look, I do think that run in December is horrible, and I'm not sure that we've seen enough from Everton in the first 10 games of the season to suggest that they will do particularly well in those games. But there's a little part of me that hopes that actually those games kind of actually play into Dyche's hands a little bit more. I think that everybody would accept that Everton are underdogs going into those games. I think his style of play probably becomes a little bit more effective and a little bit more acceptable in those games. And we saw last season of those matches, Everton won at home to Liverpool, they won at home to Chelsea, they went away to Arsenal, and they only lost that because of a really dodgy decision in the last minute. So I'm trying to take some hope from that, but ideally I wish I wasn't kind of clutching onto those straws right now, because I'd be hoping Everton would have, I don't know, certainly 12 if they'd have won last week, maybe 13 or 14 points at this stage. going into West Ham without much pressure on, going into Brentford and Wolves without much pressure on, and hopefully as a result of that, getting the buffer that they need before that December run.
Yeah, they don't have as many points as we would have hoped or as expected, I don't think. And although it's in terms of this easiest start, yeah, I mean, we looked at that and we thought over than Aston Villa and Tottenham, there's a lot of games you'd be expecting to get points from. It never works out in that way. You know, Everton probably were never going to do quite as well as we'd have hoped. And then on the flip side of it, perhaps this supposed nightmare run of fixtures in December won't be quite as bad as people have feared, like you say, for those reasons you've outlined. The Premier League is toughest domestic football competition in the world, and you say, trotting out the cliches, but really, in terms of there aren't any easy games. So what that means is, like I said, that the supposed, the poorer teams, who they're not supposed, they are the poorer teams, but they're still of a quality and they can still beat you on the day. But that flip side of that is that the better teams, you do have a chance to get against them. It's been a long standing issue that Everton perhaps haven't done as well against the better teams. That not just an issue for Sean Dyche. I'm talking an issue here going back David Moyes for many decades over the Premier League. Obviously, he famously didn't win away at Arsenal, Manchester United, Liverpool or Chelsea, as it were, the four dominant forces at the time. So it's been a long-standing issue. Yeah, just try and keep that sense of perspective. Like I said, that yes, it's clear that Everton haven't picked up as many points as we would have all liked to have seen, and I think privately possibly as many as Sean Dyche would have liked to have seen. But on the flip side of it, they can dig in against these tougher opponents and maybe not make it that hellish December that some have predicted. You just got to stay grounded on this, and I think for all that the stick that Sean Dyche has been getting this week and continues to get over the fact that he hasn't progressed from a footballing point of view in terms of bringing a more expansive, easy on the eye style. One thing that he does do very well is keep that grounded sense of perspective when others around him are losing their heads or perhaps panicking. Or he does keep everybody grounded around the group, and that's something that he does do well with his experience, and tries to keep everybody on the level. And as much as we can try and hype up these individual fixtures, I think that is something important. You've got to maintain that sense of a perspective over a Premier League season.
Yeah, I think he is good at that. I think that has been helpful over the course of the past few years. I think my only concern is probably, well, not my only concern, but one of my concerns is just, and obviously what he says in public to the press could very well be different to what he's saying to the players and what he actually thinks. But just worried that there's perhaps a little bit more of a self-assuredness in the approach that has perhaps been warranted by the performances and some of the results. That's kind of my concern, I think. And I hope that looks like there's moves to address some of that against West Ham, although I think this might be a tough game to do it in. Chris, we've been talking for 40 minutes, so we'll wrap it up here because we've got plenty to get on with ahead of the trip to West Ham. We'll finish it off as we normally do. What's your score prediction?
After all that, I said Everton do have a decent record down there. I mean, saw the 1-0 win last season when Dominic Calvert-Lewin got his 50th Premier League goal for the club. And one thing I will say is that I would go with Branthwaite for this one. I remember him. A really good game at West Ham last season. He devoured Mikel Antonio at one point. You know, he's a real sort of streetwise, wily striker, and he really physically dominated him. So I'd have no qualms about putting Jarrad Branthwaite in. I don't know. In terms, I think it's going to be a close game, and I'm actually going to go 0-0.
Yeah. No, yeah. Would you take 0-0? Would you see that as a positive result?
Yeah, I think I would. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. I think. I think a draw would be. I'm not sure it would make the next fortnight, that much easier to sit through. But I'm a bit worried about the game tomorrow. I'm going to go for a draw. I'm going to say it's going to be 1 each.
Yeah.
But I am a little bit concerned, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be proved wrong, and that Everton hit back and give us big 3 points to carry us through the international break and into Brentford. It will certainly release some of the pressure that I think we're certainly feeling. Whether or not Sean Dyche is a different matter. But that's been the Royal Blue Podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone. We really appreciate your support. We will, of course, be back next week with all the fallout from West Ham. We'll look to a few other bits and pieces during the international break. Stick with us for our coverage. Me and Chris will both be down in East London for the match tomorrow, and keep an eye on the ECHO website for all that coverage as well, and for the fallout, which will hopefully be positive fallout, but we'll have to wait and see. So, look, have a good weekend, everybody. Thanks for listening, and stay safe. Thank you.
The Royal Blue Podcast from the Liverpool Echo.